There is a moment most people never talk about, a moment that arrives quietly in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, when you have everything you were supposed to want and you still feel empty. You are sitting there, perhaps with your phone in your hand, perhaps looking out a window, and somewhere beneath the noise of your routine you notice it, a hollow ache that does not belong to any specific loss. Nobody warned you about this feeling. Nobody in school, nobody in your family, that's nobody in any of the success stories you were raised on ever told you that achieving your desires would feel like this. You did what you were told. You chased, you worked, you waited, and when the thing finally arrived, the relief lasted maybe a few days, maybe a few hours, and then the wanting simply moved somewhere else, took a new shape, pointed at a new target, and dragged you forward again. This video is for you if you have ever felt that. And not for the version of you that performs contentment on social media, but for the version that sits alone at night and wonders why nothing ever feels like enough. What if the entire architecture of your unhappiness was not a flaw in your character, but a precise and inevitable consequence of how existence itself is built? What if desire was never meant to satisfy you, because its entire function, its only biological and metaphysical purpose, is to keep you wanting? This is not a self-help reframe. This is not a trick to feel better. This is the most honest and disturbing truth. One of the greatest philosophers in history dedicated his entire life to proving, and once you understand it, not just intellectually, but in your bones, something in the way you relate to your own suffering begins to shift permanently. Arthur Schopenhauer was born in 1788 in Danzig into a wealthy merchant family, and from an extraordinarily early age he was afflicted with a sensitivity to suffering that most people spend their entire lives trying to numb. He traveled across Europe as a young man, witnessed poverty, disease, cruelty, and the mechanical indifference of nature to human pain, and instead of looking away, he looked more closely. He studied Kant, absorbed Eastern philosophy, particularly the Upanishads and Buddhist texts, and synthesized everything into a single terrifying idea that he published in 1818 in a book called The World as Will and Representation. The idea was this: beneath every phenomenon, beneath every object, every person, every thought, and every heartbeat, there is a single blind force that Schopenhauer called the will. Not a conscious will, not a loving or purposeful will, a mindless, insatiable, directionless striving that has no goal other than to perpetuate itself. And you, every cell in your body, every longing you have ever felt, every restlessness, every ambition, every craving for love or recognition or security, you are that will expressing itself through the temporary form of a human being. Think about what this means for desire. When you want something deeply and urgently, you are not expressing your authentic self. You are being used. The will moves through you the way wind moves through grass, without asking permission, without caring about what it bends. You feel the desire as if it were yours, as if satisfying it would complete you, but the moment you satisfy it, the will simply generates a new desire, because stasis is death to the will, and it cannot tolerate stillness. This is why every achieved goal reveals itself, upon arrival, to be slightly less than what you imagined. This is why every relationship that begins in electric longing eventually settles into something quieter, and sometimes something painful. This is why the new purchase, the new achievement, the new version of your life that you worked so hard to build does not hold the peace you believed it would. You were not failing to want correctly. The wanting itself was the trap. Schopenhauer described human life as oscillating between two poles with no stable resting point between them. On one side, in suffering, the acute pain of not having what the will compels you to pursue. On the other side, boredom, the dull ache that follows when you have obtained what you wanted, and the will has not yet identified its next target. Most people spend their entire lives shuttling between these two states without ever stepping outside the oscillation to ask what is actually happening. They mistake the temporary relief between suffering and boredom for happiness, and then they feel confused and ashamed when that relief does not last, as if their inability to stay satisfied is a personal failure rather than the universal condition of every conscious creature driven by blind desire. Now, pause here for a moment, because I want to ask you something directly. How long have you been carrying the weight of feeling like you are never enough, never satisfied, never quite where you feel you should be? How many times have you told yourself that the next thing, Ace, the next relationship, the next achievement, the next stage of life would finally be the one that made it click. If that question lands somewhere real inside you, I want you to go to the comments right now and write this: I am tired of chasing what does not stay. You do not have to explain anything. You do not have to be articulate or composed. Just write that one line, because somewhere in the comments, someone else who has been carrying exactly the same exhaustion will read it and feel, maybe for the first time in a long time, that they are not completely alone in this. That matters more than you know. But here is where Schopenhauer stops being merely diagnostic and becomes something else entirely. Because he did not stop at identifying the trap. He pointed towards something that functions almost like an exit, not a permanent escape from the will, because the will is what you are made of and cannot be fully abandoned while you are alive. All but a daily practice of stepping outside its grip, even briefly, that changes the texture of your entire existence over time. He found this possibility in two places: aesthetic contemplation and what he called denial of the will. And understanding both is where his philosophy transforms from philosophy into something you can actually use. Aesthetic contemplation, for Schopenhauer, was not about appreciating beauty in a casual or decorative sense. When you encounter a great work of art, a painting, a symphony, a poem, a piece of architecture that genuinely moves you, something extraordinary happens in your consciousness. For a moment, the ceaseless internal monologue of wanting, planning, calculating, and dreading falls silent. You are no longer the subject striving toward an object. You become pure perception. You are not a person who wants things. You are the act of seeing itself. Schopenhauer called this the moment when the will is temporarily suspended, or when you cease being an instrument of desire and become something closer to a mirror in which the world reflects itself without distortion. This is why music in particular fascinated him. He believed music did not represent the world the way painting or poetry does. He believed music was a direct expression of the will itself, and that listening deeply to music allowed you to experience the will from outside its grip, to feel the suffering and striving and longing of existence without being personally destroyed by it. Think about the last time you were completely absorbed in something, not distracted by something, not entertained by something, but genuinely absorbed, lost, present in a way that made time irrelevant. That absorption is what Schopenhauer was describing, and the invitation he is extending through 2 centuries of philosophy then is this: you do not have to wait for transcendence to arrive accidentally. You can cultivate it. You can build into your daily life even one moment of genuine presence, even one encounter with beauty or depth that allows the machinery of desire to fall quiet for long enough that you remember you are more than what you want. This is what it means to detach from desire once a day. Not suppression, not denial of feeling, not toxic positivity dressed in philosophical language. A genuine and practiced interruption of the automatic momentum of wanting, long enough to remember that you exist before and beyond every desire that moves through you. The deeper revelation, the one that even people who know Schopenhauer tend to underestimate, is what he observed about compassion. If everything that exists is an expression of the same underlying will, then the suffering of another person is not truly foreign to you. When you see someone in pain, what you are recognizing is the same will that drives you, trapped in a different body, expressing the same universal condition through a different life. This is why Schopenhauer placed compassion at the absolute center of ethics. Not rule-following, not social contract, not divine commandment. Compassion, the direct recognition of your own suffering and the suffering of another, was for him the only genuine moral act, because it is the only moment when the illusion of separation between individuals briefly dissolves. When you feel real compassion, you are not performing virtue. You are glimpsing the truth of what you are, which is not an isolated self competing for satisfaction in a world of other isolated selves, but a temporary expression of something vast and shared, suffering alongside every other expression of that same vast thing. This realization does not make suffering easier in a trivial sense. It does not make loss hurt less or loneliness sting less, but it does something more important. It makes the suffering meaningful in a way that isolated suffering never can be. When you understand that your pain is not a punishment or a malfunction, but a direct consequence of being alive in the same way that every conscious being is alive, the shame around suffering begins to dissolve. You stop spending energy wondering why it is happening to you, and start spending that energy more honestly, and which is to say more compassionately, toward yourself and toward everyone else who is inside the same condition. The practice Schopenhauer ultimately points toward is not withdrawal from life. It is not asceticism in the extreme sense, though he admired those who chose it. It is a quality of attention, a daily willingness to catch yourself mid-desire, to pause before the automatic reaching, to ask not, how do I get what I want, but who is wanting, and what is the nature of this wanting? And is this truly mine, or is this the blind will moving through me again? That pause, that tiny interruption of the automatic momentum, is where freedom lives, not a grand transcendent freedom, a quiet, daily, accumulative freedom that over time changes not what happens to you, but who you are while it is happening. You have been living inside desire your entire life, as if it were the ocean and you were the water. Schopenhauer is asking you to become the shore, not to stop the ocean, not to fight the waves, but to have a place to stand that the waves move through without carrying you away. That place exists. It exists in beauty, in stillness, in genuine compassion, in the honest recognition of what you are, and in the daily practice of interrupting your own momentum long enough to remember it. If something in this video reached you today, if something in Schopenhauer's vision of desire and freedom landed somewhere true inside your experience, please take a second to press the like button, not as a gesture of algorithm performance, but because every like is how this kind of content finds the people who need it most, the ones who are searching at 2 in the morning for something that finally tells the truth. And if you want to keep going deeper into this territory, into the philosophy that takes suffering seriously and transforms it into clarity, all into the ideas that do not pretend the pain away, but show you how to stand inside it with more grace and understanding, then subscribe to this channel. Every video here is built for exactly the person you are, someone who refuses shallow answers, someone who feels things deeply and wants a framework for that depth that does not collapse under honest examination. You belong here, and the next video will be waiting for you.